If you want to press admit all as well.
Good.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. There we go. Evening all, we are just kicking off. We are going to allow a couple of minutes to let some more people come in because we had some really good interest in this event on Unscheduled Care tonight. But welcome to you all. You'll all likely have just come back after a hard day's graft, likely trying to feed the kids and get them back and forth to clubs and all sorts. So thank you very much for taking the time to come along and be here this evening. We've had more questions submitted than we ever have done, which is fantastic. It's great. We get a chance to kind of discuss that in an open forum, and we've decided this time round to record on Teams, but actually stream out to Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, so that there's a wee bit more interactivity rather than just me speaking at the screen. So a couple of house rules. First, we have got the event is being recorded tonight, so if you don't want to appear your sort of image on that, then switch off your camera. We are also being streamed at the moment live on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. So likewise, if you don't want to appear on there, then please stick your camera off. We are going to use both the chat and your hands to come in for questions this evening. We are going to try and get through all the loads of lovely questions that we've had submitted ahead of time and get through as many of your questions that you're bringing with you this evening. We're starting at 7. Going to have a hard cut off at 8:30 because we've all got places to be other than here, but I'm really looking forward to the chat and looking forward to hopefully some questions we haven't heard before, as well as ones that are always good to just get clarified. So I can see people are still rolling in. To say as well, if everyone could mute their microphones, but I think after several years of pandemic and whatnot, we're all used to the normal Teams and Zoom etiquette. So another couple of minutes and then we will kick off. I see we've already got over 60 people along this evening, which is really good. You never know with these things how much interest there's going to be, but there's clearly some lots of thought around about this. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start now. We will kick off with some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So we've got a list of them, but feel free as you go through. What to do is stick your hand up if you do have a burning question, and we'll come to you in order. My colleagues will bring you in to speak, and then we'll answer your question as best we can. If we can't answer your question this evening, which may well happen, then we will make sure to get the answer up on our website in form of an FAQ, and we will make sure that everyone who came along this evening gets emailed out to highlight when that has been posted up, so your questions will all be answered. Got Robbie on with me this evening, helping to kind of filter some of the questions through, as well as my other colleagues, Amanda, Michael, Matt, and Harry. So between us all, we should be able to handle a room of what is now over 80 people. So without much further ado, Robbie, what is the first question we've got from the guys that submitted questions beforehand?
Okay, if you could pull the questions, apologies.
Yeah, no worries, that is fine. So the first one we've got here is asking whether the Unscheduled Care PGD allows us to substitute pre-filled insulin for prescribed cartridges if they forgot to bring their insulin with them. So that question there, I suppose, is around about flexibility of the form of medication that your patient is on. And yet, absolutely, Unscheduled Care allows you to do that if the person has not got their medication with them, and let's say you open your fridge in this example and oh no, you've not got exactly what it is that are prescribed, but you can watch together something that might get the right dose into them, then absolutely you can do that. That's made very clear in the sort of latter versions of the PGD that are out there, indeed the service. So you would, in that instance, yes, be able to switch the form of the medication, as long as you're not switching brand, and then make that supply to that patient, have them on their merry way. So that's a fairly straightforward one. Thank you. Put in there. I should say as well, before we kind of kick off with more questions, If you haven't for a while going into the community pharmacy NHS website, not our cps.scot, the communitypharmacy.scot.nhs.uk, and sort of sat down with a cup of tea or a bottle of wine, whatever you fancy, and made your way through the whole unscheduled care section, I'd suggest that you do that. There's always something you pick up that you maybe hadn't picked up before that'll help you in your practice. And it's not just about the supply of medication, but although most of the questions this evening that we've had submitted so far have been on that, it is also a service that supports you to refer people in the out-of-hours period into the NHS without having to send them to the front door of NHS 24, which is never a great patient journey for anyone. So that's the first question that we had fired through. The next one we have is, does the patient still need to have received the medication from ourselves within the last 6 months to get a CPUS, for example, seasonal asthma? So no, this is a good one to start with, or to have near the head of the evening. Doesn't have to be your patient to make a supply. They don't have to have had the medication in the last 6 months. They don't have to have proof of that medication. They don't actually even ever have to have been in receipt of a prescription before, as long as it has been prescribed before. And that's an important distinction. Then you can make that supply. So that covers your people where, say, something's been prescribed, as it always is, Friday evening at the GP. Somebody at the GP has in the wisdom said, and we'll send that through to the pharmacy, which maybe doesn't happen. Then when they come into your pharmacy, if you can satisfy yourself that you know, the patient knows what it is they're meant to be on, or indeed you can access the emergency care summary to be triply sure, and you know what the person can get, then that PGD allows you to make that supply. So all these old, I think sometimes these are Chinese whisper parts, the start of a service a long time ago that has now evolved to become more and more permissive. But we still seem to have almost a bit of a hangover effect. Basically, the way that people learned has kind of stuck with them, and maybe remember, no, you need to bring a packet of the old medication, which doesn't nowadays really make much sense, because if you've forgotten your medication or lost it or completely finished it and chucked the packet in the bin, you're not going to have an empty packet to bring with you. So we have many sources now available to confirm what medication the patient's on, and then the PGD itself is very, very permissive and allows you to make supplies in pretty much any circumstance, apart from some of the medications that are just out and out not allowed, for example, Schedule 2 and 3 CDs, and various other medications that sometimes will require a wee bit of a review. Just to shake up a wee bit, I'm going to check with my colleagues. Are there any questions that are coming in through the chat or on hands just now before I go back to the ones that were submitted ahead of time? None? You're all awfully shy. There's over 90 people on this call. Get your fingers out and get them on your keyboards, please, and bring some questions. What I'll do is I'll keep going through these, because we've really got a fair number, so that should keep us ticking along for a little while. The next question we had in was, let's see, from Brian was asking, if a generic drug is unavailable and the only alternative is a more expensive branded product, can we issue a CP4 written as the brand if we have been given permission from the local practice pharmacist? So here's the thing, this is probably crossing across two different issues. There's unscheduled care, and then there are shortages and how we handle shortages. What I would say to this one is your route for this one, if you've got the original script in hand, your route to make a supply here, if you've got a prescriber's permission, is to use either a PC as a prescriber contacted, or a PMR, as in using the reference of the PMR, to make a clinical judgment endorsement on the original prescription to change that medication quantity, strength, form, whatever. There is a shortages guidance document that you may have come across. If you haven't, it is on our website. I'm sure Robbie will be able to send a link out to you later on. That was developed in partnership with NHS boards. And to cut a long story short, your PMRs will essentially allow you to change any medicine for any other medicine. Quite whether it will be paid on the other end is another question. But just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So the NHS boards were perfectly happy with us switching a generic for a generic, a brand down to a generic. But actually, the general rule of thumb here is that we don't switch, whether it's a generic or a brand that you've got in hand, we don't switch to a brand without prior approval from either your prescriber or a sort of blanket agreement across your health board. That was the line that was drawn in the sand with respect to that. So if you don't have either of those, then you'll be seeking a new prescription, and that's not technically coming under unscheduled care there. And there's always going to be fringe exceptions in extreme circumstances. That would be the route we would choose for that one there, particularly now that the remuneration for unscheduled care has moved on, and in receipt of a payment from a pool of money that's scheduled care activity, because then that is what excuse me, that is what that funding is sitting there for, and else like shortages is handled according to the shortages guidance. Okay, folks, any questions through yet? Phil, okey-dokey. No worries, we've got plenty to keep us going. Somebody's going to have to talk to me at some point, otherwise I'm just going to end up going the life out, you know. So the next one we have got a question that says, are we obliged to supply emergency medication when the GP surgery is open? So I suppose there's a wee bit to unpack there. It's not necessarily an obligation, it's about continuity of care for the patient. So the thing I would always encourage you to do is consider the consequences of supply and the consequences of non-supply. And when it comes to unscheduled care, there's more often than not, the consequences of not supplying will be greater, worse than the consequences of supplying a given medication. So over the years, the PGD's become, as I said earlier, more and more permissive. And that includes, whereas it used to be only in the hours period once GPs were shut, now if you can assure yourself that not only is it the right thing, you're certain of what the patient needs, but there's no way you're going to practically be able to get a prescription turned around for the patient needs that medication, then by all means that supply can be made. It is, generally speaking, less hassle, and particularly if the patient hasn't already ordered. So you can give a full cycle of what they would ordinarily get and then send the documentation into the GP so that you're not doubling up on admin and having to reconcile the script that comes in further down the line as well. So yeah, I would say you absolutely can do it, not necessarily about an obligation, but you do need to think about the patient care there, about what the consequences are if you choose not to supply. And that is entirely down to your own professional judgment, but we would always encourage you to use the PGD as fully as you can for those unscheduled care incidents. Another question we've got is on a slightly different angle. So somebody's asking around about, can we not have an IT improvement so this is from Razvan, so that the UCF links to GPs and we don't need the paper trail, i.e. having to hand in the form to GP practices. That I am delighted to say is in the works. So our PMRs are actually all geared up to do that. What we need is for the GP IT to roll out. So that is coming in phase 2 of what we call GP IT re-provisioning, because the GPs get their IT procured by the NHS as part of a contract. And there only is, well, we're to now one supplier in Scotland, whereas we were working with 6 PMR suppliers. But PMRs are all geared up to do that. It's just the GP IT isn't ready to receive and slow that in, but that is absolutely in the works and will be just wonderful when it comes along, because it's one thing being able to hand in the slip that's printed off to your GP that's next door, the one that your driver goes to anyway, but any of you that work in anywhere remotely touristy will know the headache of attempting to get information across to a GP that is not necessarily local. Amanda and Robbie were both hands up like a shot there. Amanda, you were in first, just ahead of Robbie.
Quick question come in from Rosemary. If there's an out of stock but a smaller, more expensive counter pack is available, will endorsing the script allow us to be paid for it, or can/should we use CPUS, for example, Umivate cream or Nasacort nasal spray?
So I might divert my colleague Michael on for part of the answer to this. So you will be paid, again, depends on what part of the drug tariff and whatnot things are in, but you will be expected to give the most cost-effective pack. or most cost-effective combination of packs to make up what has been prescribed. Quite often that means that you will not be then reimbursed for necessarily using those items. But Michael, I don't know if you want to add anything extra to that.
No, to be fair, I don't know the packs off the top of my head, so I'm just trying to look at which ones are POM packs and which ones are Ps or GSL. But the basic principle is about supplying in a cost-effective way to the NHS. So I think we will probably answer this a little bit more fully after the event. But I think probably the principle around about using kind of unscheduled care as an alternative to using the endorsement would be that we should be able to endorse appropriately through the original prescription, as you mentioned earlier, in order to get paid for what was supplied. Yeah. But we will check around about the use of P as opposed to POM packs, because I think the general consensus would be that that's not the best way to go.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Sorry, Amanda, was there a second component to that, or do you think that's answered that one?
No, I think that's that one, and I'll pass over to Robbie Adam.
Robbie, Grant, thanks, Roy.
Just like to say, for those of you joining us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, we are getting your questions processed into the chat, and we will get to them as quickly as possible. But the people in Teams, feel free to use the hand function if you want to raise your hand and ask a question that way. If you don't fancy chatting, that's absolutely fine, and we can answer it through a discussion like we just did. That's all. Adam, I'll throw back to you.
Probably shouldn't have told everybody that we're live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and all the rest of it. That's probably stopped them from sticking their hands up and speaking to us on Teams. But nevertheless, we shall roll on with the questions that I'm quite keen to get through the ones that were submitted ahead of time as well, because people will be expecting answers to them. So we have got another question from Katharina, who is asking, will access to ECS be reinstated, as my application was halted due to changes to the process and haven't heard about it since? For that one, we're going to have to ask you to speak to your NHS board colleagues. We don't take to do with the administration of ECS, although Amanda here is our resident expert in ECS, and just as well because we need one, because it is hideously complicated across the country, far more so than it needs to be. I'm sure we'll come across questions this evening as to can and should I access a patient from out with my areas, with my health board areas information, and the answer is it depends where you are. So yes, we are very much on your behalf campaigning for there to be a Once for Scotland approach for this, but it is quite far away, I would suggest. So yeah, unfortunately, you're going to have to check in with your board colleagues for that. Possibly your IM&T facilitator, the details which you should find on, again, that communitypharmacy.scot.nhs.uk website. Moving on, we have got from Juan, is it possible to access electronic medical records for patients from another pharmacy? If so, how? There we go. Straight back into ECS again. So again, it depends on where you are. So if we take some examples, now Amanda, correct me if I in this step here. If you are in, let's say where I am in Lanarkshire, then yes, you will be able to access the ECS records from somebody who is from out with that health board, which is very handy if anyone ever chose to come to Lanarkshire on holiday. And however, if you are in Glasgow, then yes, correct. Then you are not able to look at anyone who is out with, and it's all to do with how the ECS is set up and configured within each health board, and that is again out with our control. We would have it look quite differently. Amanda, are you looking to chime on this?
Yeah, just a quick thing, Adam, and it kind of builds on this, just to remind everybody that while the patient can move, the pharmacist can't unless they're signed off in all the boards. So if you're in Lanarkshire and the patient comes in and they're from Lanarkshire, that's absolutely fine, or they're from anywhere, that's absolutely fine. If you're signed off in Lanarkshire but go to do, for example, a shift in Glasgow, but you're not signed off in Glasgow, although you'd be able to access the system, you're not authorised to do so. So this is a bit complicated, as Adam said, and I think based on even we knew we would be putting more information out, but I think we'll write something up in the kind of post-meeting feedback to give you an update. We'll put it somewhere on the website because it is ever changing, and you know, we appreciate that it's complex, but we want to make it straightforward for you as possible, because it's critical that we use this system not only to give great patient care, not only to make really safe supplies, but also, if we don't use the system, we're always open to challenge of, well, do you need it if you're never using it? So it's a broad piece, and we'll get a bit more detail out for everybody. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, and I would absolutely encourage everyone. So if you're sitting here, whether you're sitting here going, yep, I use that all the time. So, I mean, I don't get let out near patients that often, but when I do every single locum shift I've done in the last year, I've ended up using ECS to support my work on the day, and it is a fantastic tool. So again, if you're sitting there wondering what it is, or thinking, yeah, maybe I should dig out a password, please do go out, look it out. It really does make that difference between a short, simple patient journey and a really horrible weekend for somebody. Truly. So go and look at all the detail from your local health board sites and sign up to ECS access in any health boards that you worked. And we can now see the bosses get his hand up. So Harry, you got something to come in with?
Yeah, maybe just to build on that, Adam, for you, and we've got a question in from Rona, so I'll take it first. I've also got another couple from colleagues on the call. So Rona's asking, can I use my ECS access to inform decision making when working in an area other than community pharmacy?
Great question. It would have to be within an NHS service, I would almost certainly say, and what I'm going to say there is probably a bit of a cop-out to say, speak with the service managers in that particular area. Your account will be associated, I'm sure it will be marked in some way or another as a community pharmacy account. I think each of us would probably, I think you could stand up in court and explain why you did what you did, but the information governance around these systems is hugely challenging. So yeah, so I would say speak to your service managers just to check, and they may have to indeed go and refer to IT colleagues within I'm assuming the health board you're speaking of. But yeah, we know that ECS is absolutely used in other healthcare settings for sure.
Okay. I'll give you the next question, Adam.
Of course.
So we'll get Brian up in the NHS Tayside. So who do we send the CP4 prescription to if the patient isn't registered anymore at the surgery that they said they were? Now, the surgery has no information in the clinical portal, is still showing incorrect surgery. We're not able to contact the patient to ask the question. So they are a genuine patient, but the last supply was 6 months previous for this item, and there is no guarantee when they'll be back. So, and the supply was for an inhaler. So really, who do we send the prescription to, and could we supply, in summary, Adam?
Okay, so two separate questions there. I think the should we supply is good. That one's going to come down to your professional judgment. There's nothing legally stopping you there from making that supply. You've got a couple of routes, even if you believe they're not registered with a GP practice, you could always make a true emergency supply if you so wished. But actually, the PGD is there for you to be used. So I'm less concerned with that part. I think if you have a concern, well, again, here's two things. If you've got a concern over the person's well-being, so we have come across some things in the past where somebody has been, you get sometimes challenging patient units. I'm not saying that's what this patient is, but that can be quite a challenging thing to find out where to send the right clinical information. You can, at the same time, I'm saying this, it sounds like you've gone to great lengths to try and figure out the right place to send this so that somebody has got a complete record, but there is only so much that you will be able to do.
Yeah.
If it is completely impractical and in fact impossible, if you can't get a hold of the patient, to then find out where they're registered, and beyond going to your health board colleagues to see if they've got a route to check that through there. They have much more, or many more different systems and ways to access and track care and all the rest of it. If they, I would suggest that's your last port of call, and beyond that, it sounds like you've made a sterling effort and your claim will go through, and there is only so much that humans can do. This is absolutely a fringe case.
Smashing. Now, one last one, then we'll hand back to your questions. I think that's already come in, Adam. So this is Kirsten is asking, I've been put in the position when an RP in a care home pharmacy where a local GP practice has refused to issue prescriptions for late monthly requests and has said that we can issue it using the PGD. Now, I don't believe this is the correct use of that PGD, but maybe someone could clarify for us.
No, again, it all depends on the individual circumstance at the time. So if you know that you're going to end up missing a deadline and patients are going to go without their medication, you could consider the use of that tool just to get over the problem. I think what the real problem here is relationships. Relationships and roles and responsibilities and agreements. It may be that you have to go to, again, board colleagues to look at what SLEs or SLAs or LESs, and in the case of the GP side, are in place and what the terms of those are. That would seem an unreasonable request to me. If it looked like you were actually genuinely not going to be able to get a hold of prescriptions for that cycle and patient care was at risk, then I don't envy the job, hideous. But again, coming down to professional judgment, I think you could stand up and say in court, not that you're ever going to get dragged to court over any of this. The CPS policemen don't exist, but yeah, I'm sure you could use it if it was really getting down to dire straits. I would stress all about relationships, so perhaps maybe a hand with the board to get over what the issue is there. Joke, grand, right? Okay, I'm going to stick on from the sheet we had before. Now we have got here's a great one. And this has actually come in about 4 times here, which is, can we use unscheduled care for prescription item alignment? And my answer to that is no. No, that is not an appropriate use. If a patient is going to run out of their medication, this is the tool that you use. If their medication is out of sync, yes, that is a pain. But there is absolutely no reason that in given enough time and notice that can't be synchronized through our ordinary routes of obtaining prescriptions and all linked up. And indeed, if you have prescriptions in hand and you are trying to do the right thing for the patient and align their medications to support their patient care, then again, we can go back to, within certain tolerances, using those PC and PMR endorsing tools with the original prescriptions to adjust the values that you have in front of you to try and line these up for patients. And this is really a joint project. If you've got a lot of problems like this, is a joint project to run with your GP colleagues. It's a perennial question, perennial problem. I would suggest it's symptomatic of there being a gap in service. There needs to be a service somewhere. If we can show that it truly improves patient care or indeed supports minimising over-ordering, for example, then I would say there's a case to be argued that there is a separate case with a separate service and separate funding that needs to be established if what we're saying is that we want to synchronise people's medication. And serial prescribing is also another very handy route for this, because of course the tolerances there are quite wide as well for you to use as you go along, and people take more of one and then the other and so on and so forth. But actually as well, if you're establishing people with serial prescriptions, the whole point is that at the start they're synchronized. So there's a couple of routes towards this, but unscheduled care is not one of them. That is not the core use of this service at all. So hopefully that one answers that for you. Any other questions from the crowd, folks, before we move on to the next one? Harry, there we go.
And this is both Julie and Anne-Marie Adam are asking the same question or got similar concerns. So patients presenting regularly at extended hours pharmacy, most commonly for inhalers, in reality not accessing the GP at all. So successive supplies, e.g. 3 and 4 times from pharmacy. So a comment about that one, Adam, that's Anne-Marie and Julie.
Okay, thank you. So there is absolutely nothing to stop you from doing that. Clearly, there's a bit of a clinical concern there, and that's where that conversation with the patient needs to be around. We all know that was a 2014 NRAD report that excessive use, I'm assuming that this is your SABA inhalers, that excessive use, excessive over-ordering really pushes our individuals into that really high risk space for asthma attacks and indeed death if they're relying too much on that blue inhaler. So I believe that's a good jumping off point to have that conversation. Would it stop you from making the supply? I don't think I'd want to be the person that didn't make the supply. Yes, that may be frustrating at the time. It may be that you might want to have at least perhaps get their permission to have a chat with their team as well, to have a look at what it is that's actually going on. But that is a sign to me of poorly controlled, again, I'm going to make an assumption here, but asthma, and that would be grounds for a clinical intervention, but not necessarily non-supply, entirely up to the individual pharmacist that's on at the time. But yes, that has been around since the dawn of time, because you can avoid your asthma from your GP as long as you like, but you can avoid needing your medication. I'll move on to another one that we've got whilst some more questions flow through. So from before this session, we had quite a nice wide question here. What's not permitted on UCF? So I'm going to get a wee bit technically here. So UCF is wider than unscheduled care. So UCF is a claiming tool. It happens to house unscheduled care. It also happens to house the PGs for Pharmacy First. It houses Pharmacy First itself, and gluten-free smoke cessation supply, and all the rest of it. So I almost look at it as having separate slots for separate services. So if we focus on the unscheduled care slot of UCF, so each of those slots has got different regulations, attributes. So for example, the gluten-free slot of UCF is only going to allow you to supply gluten-free foods that are on the prescribable list. If you prescribe atenolol under that service, you're not getting paid. If you likewise prescribe anything apart from smoking cessation products that are allowed on this smoking cessation part of the module, then you're not getting paid. Likewise, Pharmacy First, anything that's not on the approved list, you're not getting paid, so on and so forth. Unscheduled care, because you can supply pretty much any medication, apart from a few that I'll mention just now, has got the widest permission settings on it, and the vast bulk of medications that people take in Scotland are permitted to be supplied on the service. The few exceptions that we have are controlled drugs, Schedule 2 and 3, and certain medications, ones that are probably more likely to require monitoring. And that's where our weaknesses in the system of not having access to records and information mean that it is a much higher risk thing to be making a supply of, let's say, Metagen than it is aspirin or atenolol. So that's the general rationale behind some of the things that are excluded. You can find all the details of what's excluded on the full PGD. I wouldn't suggest that you go in there and try and memorise them, far from it, but it's there for a reference. You get a request for something that's a little unusual, just as we double check before you go ahead and make the supply. So hopefully that answers that question. That was from Mariam. Next one now. There we go. So does there exist a database of all the surgery's NHS emails, because it's very difficult to fax a CP4 and time consuming to try and contact the surgery and get their email. That's from David Smith. Yep, you're absolutely right. Scottish Government are currently working on this. It is slow progress, but what I will say, to be fair, is that there, as we've found, much to our disbelief, there's actually no one place that holds every community pharmacy's NHS email address. Each board holds their own, and you'd think it would be easy to pull them all and collate them, but it is not. So yes, no, Scottish Government are on board with this. This is something again Amanda has been flying the flag for, and we've got the Scottish Government, and they are working on making that available to you. I wish I could tell you when that will be made available, but we continue to. It gets raised every single month, so your pleas are heard. I can assure you with that. Anyway, cool. Harry.
Just some threads for you, certainly from the chat, Adam, and Kathleen certainly asking around balancing of medicines, synchronising meds. So we've already kind of asked that, but I think it's something for the team to maybe take away, because it's coming through as a theme for us around that, to clarify with some of our other people. And then Lucy's asking, Adam, can you remind us what opioids would be allowed on CPUS in case someone forgets the schedules, as in 2s and 3s, I imagine?
Oh, Lucy, that is so unfair. Do you want to come on and tell people? You're testing me today.
I'm asking you because I've forgotten. Obviously not tramadol.
No. So all Schedule 3s are out the window. That now includes clearly gabapentin and pregabalin as well. So you are really quite limited to your Schedule 4s and below. So you could technically do oromorph because it's not excluded. But beyond that, you're, I suppose technically your cocodamol 500s as well. And geez, somebody who's a better pharmacist than I am. 114 of you in here. what schedules could go on all 5,500 again? And again, all these things are subject to your professional judgment as to whether that is the appropriate thing to do in that moment of time. That does actually bring me to another completely unrelated, but it's made me think of it, point around about substance misuse prescriptions and in the unscheduled care, sorry, the hours periods. There is absolutely he-haw McGraw, as most of you I'm sure will be aware, that you can do in the out-of-hours period in the vast majority of health boards, which is there's somebody that oromorph was excluded. It may well be, and I will apologise and stick my hands up if that is true. Prescribe. Okay, so yes, as I say, down to professional judgment there, and always check the PGD and don't listen to me clearly on that one. So other one. So why can't provide injections for most categories when these are so common and asked for all the time at the weekends? So that's from Neil. So that one is probably because of these days, particularly with biologics and the like, a disproportionate number of them require more close and careful monitoring. In some cases, they're only meant to be administered by a healthcare professional. Some of it's down to SPC details that would remove them from there. But that is absolutely something that we can take forward. So every roughly 6 months, there is a review at NHS 24 who sort of hold and own this PGD as to the medications that are on the list. They very carefully go through it with a fine-tooth comb, as you'll see around the what's new section at the head of each new release to be applied or is safe and effective to supply. Is included on that PGD, but if there are some specifics, then by all means forward them through to us. We are always involved in that chat. And I know that Siobhan from NHS 24 is on the call this evening as well, and we'd be interested to hear about anything else that you would like to see added on that isn't there already. I saw a hand go up there from the crowd, not letting you away with it. Who was it? That answers your question. Oh, there we go, Harry.
Yeah, next question for you, Adam's come in from Claire. Can you use UCF for different forms of medication, either when there is a supply issue or a compliance issue? Like, so out of hours, a child has been prescribed antibiotic tablets, finding it difficult to take. Therefore, could you use UCF to supply liquid to ensure compliance?
Sure. So here's the thing around this. So there's a difference here, again, between unscheduled care and handling of shortages. So if you've got the script in hand and it's not dispensed yet, right? So you've got a valid prescription and it is just a matter of changing the form and directions or quantity, strength, whatever, then the route you want to go down there is the shortages handling process, or using PC, PMR on the original prescription endorsement to do that. If it's a little different and you've let somebody away with the, let's do it more realistically, if you've let somebody away with the flucloxacillin liquid and they come back saying my child just will not swallow this, which is completely understandable because it's rank, then that's when you would use unscheduled care because you've no longer got that valid script in hand. And yes, you would be able to do it for a form that was different from that was originally prescribed, which then allows you to do, for example, the capsules and provide that to the patient. So there is a wee bit of a difference there depending on whether you've got that script in hand or the script has been spent, in other words, and that would be an unscheduled care because you can't get your hand on a prescription. Excellent. Okay, well, that answers your questions, folks. Thanks, Harry. Cool. So, got very, I need to I'm needing to read these very quickly so I can skip over the ones that are some of the same questions that have been asked before. So there's one here that just says unscheduled care and antidepressants with a question mark. So we probably need to be more detailed to answer that question, but if I was to hazard a guess, it would be one of these residual maybe myths that's still kicking about. I know that a number of GPs don't or won't put on antidepressants to somebody's repeat list, and there is an old myth that says something's got to be a repeat for you to supply it under unscheduled care, which is untrue. So it may well be all caught up in that kind of hangover from a time long gone by, but no, it's perfectly permissible to supply an antidepressant to somebody again. As with every single supply you make, it's got to be down to your own professional judgment. But again, the real key thing for me is you've got to weigh up the consequences of supplying and not supplying, and not just literally on your health. So we know that some of these medications have got long half-lives. You might make a judgment that, they'll be fine till Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. But actually, you've got to think about that mental health aspect as well. What is that going to do to that person's level of anxiety, not having the medication? So yeah, again, entirely down to yourself, but there is absolutely nothing stopping you doing that. So, but if the person that asked the question happens to be on the call, so I know it's Jennifer, if you're on the call and I've not quite got the right end of the stick, then by all means, please stick your hand up and let me know, and I'll answer as best I can. Any others, folk? Right, let's keep going. So we have got now one on optometry referral. So we're very lucky to have a formal route with optometry where we can make referrals to them and they can make referrals as well for supply, which is good for patients all round. So this question here is asking, optometry referrals are routinely requesting products to be supplied on Pharmacy First for indications that aren't covered by the PGD or indeed by the SPC. So tear duct lesions, corneal ulcers, and that's non-prescribing optometrists that are referring in. So asking, how should this be managed to ensure the best patient care? So that's actually really good feedback for us. We can work at our national level with Optometry Scotland to clarify and inform their members. They don't have a complete membership across Scotland. So what we'd say is, whilst we can do that, there's probably some work being done with perhaps the primary care community pharmacy group, who each have a lead in each of your health boards, and indeed yourselves locally as well, just to have that conversation that says, look, this service can really only provide things according to the SPC, and here's what that kind of looks like. So it's a good way to start relationships with other local members of the multidisciplinary team. So yeah, I would encourage you to go and have a word with them, and we will certainly take that forward. I'll take a note to take that to our colleagues in Optometry Scotland so that we can see if we can get some communications put out from them as well, because the worst thing we want is to be table tennis and somebody back and forth between two different practitioners for some technicalities. So I suppose what you should do with that actual patient, well, if they're not a prescriber, you're not a prescriber. Is it urgent? If it is urgent, then it may well need to be the optical hospital, or indeed referring through the professional contact line that you should all have in your boards now. Hopefully, he says, crossing his fingers. Next one we've got is, there's another. Can we use unscheduled care to align medication? Nope. Okay, here are another few. Right, okay, so there's somebody who's got let's call it a compound question, a few questions all in the one go. So concerns that have been asked to sign prescription forms on behalf of other professionals and not sure what legal implications could potentially be when it's my signature on the form. So for example, A, requests from out of hours which are not normally covered on unscheduled care, for example, antibiotics. So I suppose I need a little bit more information on that to answer it fully, but this is one of two things. It is either that there is a process in place that was put in place in COVID and has since been pulled from pretty much every health board, but is maybe still hanging on by its teeth in some others. That it may well be that they are using the intention to prescribe combined with unscheduled care to make a legal supply that doesn't then require the onward forwarding of a prescription, in which case it's worth having a word with us. If it is in fact that could also just be a request, an emergency supply request from the prescriber, which doesn't require you to do unscheduled care, just to process a manual prescription and await the original coming through within 72 hours. But again, if we've got the wrong end of the stick there, just stick your hand up, let me know. Next one was on off-license request for chloramphenicol from optometrists. So we've just covered that in the previous question. COVID antiviral prescriptions, this must be a local service. I would need a wee bit more information on there to comment there, really. But another part of that question is there's increasing requests from patients sent by GP receptionists to get emergency supplies for medication which has been prescribed once and has to be reviewed before further supplies are given. Appointments can't be made before the medication runs out, and the surgery should be responsible for arranging medication. I would tend to agree with you there. That again depends on, is it Friday in the afternoon? Is the GP already out on the house calls before they then just go home themselves? All down to individual circumstance. So I would suggest that there's worth a conversation there at the GP end. Perhaps they need to be prescribing more in the first instance. So yeah, I think that is definitely a local relationships thing. And then appears not being used as intended. Patients are playing the system. Again, that very much depends on your local situation. And really, I wouldn't suggest anyone would love going around in probably one of the busier periods for the pharmacy network as their routine way of getting a hold of their prescriptions. That's probably one for how do we support those patients then to get their orders in on time, and might be one for going and speaking to your local surgeries and health board around about the wonderful benefits of serial prescribing and dispensing, I would suggest. I've been that question took a little while there, so whilst I have been rambling on, team, are there any other questions coming in?
Not as yet, Adam.
Okay.
Don't know on these ones.
Right, folks, please stick your hand up or stick your question into the chat if you like. We're at 7:45. I've still got a number of questions to get through. Once I get to the end of them, if there's no further ones, then we'll sign off. Otherwise, if you can keep us going, we'll keep you going until about 8:30 at the latest. So next one. So we have got, again, somebody just as good supposed to reinforce this. Lorraine asking us, give examples of when unscheduled care should not be used. So there we go. We're talking about synchronizing medications earlier on. We've got controlled drugs, other items that are excluded on the PGD. Non-Scottish patients is another one. So that is the use of the PGD is not extended to there. And in that case, you'll be looking at either doing an emergency supply, a classic traditional one, which would include anyone from the home nations. It still includes the Brexit, sorry, the old legislation is rolled over. So whilst it might not be reciprocated, you're still able to make supplies for EEA patients. Again, if you can satisfy yourself that the supply is safe and effective, and yes, there'll be a charge against it, but you can absolutely make that supply. For countries where there isn't a reciprocal agreement, so America, Australia, all these places, that's a more difficult. You're going to have to get your hands, or they're going to have to get their hands on a prescriber and find a private way of obtaining that medication. So that's probably about the last for there, Lorraine. Another question. Oh, a good one. Here in one that my wife actually asked me to bring tonight because she works in care homes. So community pharmacies and care homes, does unscheduled care cover, for instance, 2 eternal 50 milligram tablets for a mid-cycle shortage, or would a script be needed for this from the GP? So that is, again, down to the absolute individual circumstance and probably around whether you're finding that's a routine request or not. So these things can happen. You can accidentally pop 2 out. They could have been stored wrong, destroyed, packaging could have been damaged, sold, whatever. All these instances, yeah, absolutely. It is the path of least resistance for you and for the care home. If you are finding that if you believe there is a clinical safety issue, a legal issue, if it's happening so often that you're worried about medicines management within the home, then you need to have a wider conversation with that care home that you service, and perhaps with the GP surgery as well, about how things might work better. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you from doing it for care home patients if there is that shortfall for whatever reason. It's no different from somebody in their own home dropping a few tablets down the toilet or forgetting them or whatever. So yeah, I think you can absolutely use them. Amanda, I see your hands up. Hopefully a question from the crowd.
Yeah, it's actually a question it relates actually into pharmacy first rather than unscheduled care, Adam. So I just thought I'd just quickly pick it up. It was a specific about chloramphenicol drops being in short supply, and can we do anything to allow dispensaries and pharmacies to use the POM drops on pharmacy first? Just quickly taking, we'll have another Ask Me Edmund Pharmacy First in the future, but I think the quick answer is no, because it's a POM and therefore you'd have to be a prescriber. But Lucy will take it offline and have a bit of a look at second line, etc., see what might be options, but we'd be into a separate PGD. And in terms of the pharmacy first list, starting to bring in additional PGDs for additional lines would make the system very complicated, but we'll take that very specific one away and come back to you.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, the latest clinical guidance has us doing everything in our power to avoid the drop. So the first line advice should be followed about the regular motions and all the rest of it, hygiene. And if it's intractable, then moving on to use that again. At that point, you would struggle if you didn't have a PGD or a PPAC available. But that's the situation, unfortunately. Harry, looks like you've got something for us.
Yeah, we've got three for you, Adam. We'll start with the first one, and we might not be able to cover this, but Suma would like to know, are optometrists able to refer into NHS 24 via the professional to professional line?
Oh, I have got no idea.
Yeah.
Not a clue.
My own previous experience is they may well be able to, but it'd be something that Optometry Scotland would be able to help with, I'm sure.
I think they have in more urban, in the bigger conurbations where you've got like you get dental hospitals, there are out of hours optical services as well. I'm certain they've got direct lines into there. But in terms of the general, if they had a wider concern, I'm not sure they've got access to the same number as us. So I think the answer there is yes. Check. And no.
Check. Yep. A question for you from Wen. A patient is on repeat for insulin cartridge and forgot to bring the pen and insulin. Can we use the UCF PGD to supply in the insulin flex pen pre-filled?
Yeah, so we answered this one at the top of the meeting, but it's good to, once we've got I see many more people on now. Absolutely, you can do that. So a shift of a form to make sure that the patient gets what they need. I think particularly in the case of insulin, I mean it goes for everything, but particularly in the case of insulin, I wouldn't want to be the person that was allowing that small technicality to get perfectly legal. It's getting that dose into the person in the right way.
And the last one for just now, Adam, I'll hand you back to your pre-questions. So Amy is asking, what would the standard amount or quantity of a medication expected to be supplied to a patient who has run out of their medication?
That is entirely up to you. So what we'd say is always with these things, there's always a bit of joint work, and it is worth having a conversation with your surgery. And I understand that if you work with 7 different surgeries, that will take a lot longer and be a bit more complex. But if you can even maybe get a chance to speak to a cluster lead, for example, to figure out best ways of working. It depends on what the patient's presentation is like. It depends on what the medication is, although really we shouldn't be making judgments solely based on that. And it depends as well where the patient's at in terms of their order cycle too. So if somebody, I was working the other Saturday, if somebody's coming in and they are usually on 1 to 2 medications and they just haven't ordered it and they've run out, personally, I'm going to give them the whole amount that they would normally get of both medications. Because if we take a whole system view, you are not then doing that dispensing work for a small amount to then have an order go through, be processed by the GP, as well as processing your notification that you've given 5 tablets or whatever of each, for them to then get out the other side another prescription for them to come into the pharmacy and you to reconcile it and all of that nonsense. So I think for me, I would go with what makes sense based on the patient that's in front of you. If there's something you believe there's a clinical issue with, or you think might need monitoring or something, but it is something you're allowed to give, then perhaps you're more cautious. Perhaps you're given 5 days, 7 days. I would always say, though, for me as a minimum, if we're talking about Saturdays here, and the patient, particularly if the patient has an order, just bear in mind what the turnaround times are. The worst thing you want to do is supply somebody with 2 tablets that does them Saturday, Sunday, and then of course the order can't go until Monday and they've got no tablets again. So you're asking somebody else to do a subsequent supply. So I would err on the generous side. And think about the whole flow after what you do. If you can make a whole supply and avoid any other work being done for another 2 months, no reason why you can't. The PGT allows you to do that. Okay.
Thanks, Adam. I'm just assimilating the next few for you, so you might want to take one of your own and I'll do the rest.
Sure. I saw somebody's hand go up there that was done. Somebody done? Somebody want to speak up?
Hi.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you, I think.
Hello.
Oh, hello. Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. It was just when you contact the professional to professional line. I didn't know, maybe it's because I only locum intermittently and I hadn't been aware of the change. But it used to be when you phoned, you would be given a time for the patient to attend, either cross-house or so I'm talking Ayrshire here. But I've noticed now when I phone, it's always the doctor now phoning the patient back, and it's a time scale for the doctor phoning back. Is that now, do you know if that's how it's always going to be? And then also, I used to, because we often get carers coming in, like if they're long-term carers for their husband or their wife that can't come in, and you would normally discuss if there was an issue, I could phone and get an appointment or the doctor to go out. But now they've said to me, I've got to have the patient in front of me. And as I said, that might just be my lack of experience with phoning the professional to professional line, or has there been a change?
So how each board operates their out of hours service will differ. So this is something that actually, if I'm honest, hands up, but before I came to CPS and sat in a national role, I misunderstood how this worked. I believed that when you were phoning that professional line, you were getting NHS 24 employees, when in fact it's not. It is NHS board employees who set up their out of hours services. They work in partnership with NHS 24, but very, very much independent. So they will operate in different ways. There was a while back there, we had a couple of boards that had stood down their professional to professional contact line, which in our eyes is absolute madness, because pharmacies are sending you pre-triaged people. Why send them straight back into the front door of NHS 24? So yes, you will see variations in how they are handling things. They will also, as any service would do, go through quality improvement cycles. They will try new things, because everywhere is under such pressure that actually it might even change from one weekend to the other, depending on the safe staffing level that they have at that given point in time, Deborah. So I can't give you an answer as to yes, that's how it will be now, because you could cross a border and it would be different, and equally you could phone up next weekend and it could be different. I think that the thing to bear in mind is that we've got that facility to get through to somebody without having a patient go through such a horrible journey. Colleague Siobhan is on the call this evening. I suppose that's maybe a little bit of feedback in terms of the one there where if you don't have the patient in front of you, then the patient suffers. That's probably one that we can, I'm sure Siobhan will pick that up, and we can talk about that offline after the fact. Does that answer your questions okay, Deborah?
Yes, that's thank you.
Perfect, excellent. And Harry, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm going to combine 2 questions here, Adam. The first one's Emma on Teams, who's saying the GPs and the health board are advising community pharmacy to supply 100 grams of Benivate on UCF to replace prescriptions for 30-gram pack supplies due to supply issues. Is this appropriate? And we'll maybe cover that in Emma's experience, who's coming a wee bit late. And I'll link it to Alana's Facebook question or maybe statement saying GP surgeries have asked us not to use the CPES and provide emergency supply, as there is less paperwork for them and other surgery request forms not sent to them. Can there be wider training with GP surgeries to stop these kind of requests and putting teams in awkward questions? So one, a bit about the kind of supply and how UCF is being used there, or unscheduled care.
So notwithstanding the comment that Michael came in and helped with earlier, where you're paid for the most effective providing the most effective packs for the NHS. And we did say we would go in and get you a more full answer for that later. If you've got an original valid prescription, then your route you want to be using. If you've got a prescriber contacting you, or you are contacting a prescriber and they're telling you to do something different than what was originally on the prescription, then your route is to make sure you make full use of the endorsements of PC or indeed PMR on your PMR system, and make that change to the original prescription, which will make sure that the message that goes to get paid is what you actually handed out. But I will ask you to look out for Michael and my answer coming out on the other side of this this evening's event. The other one, I think that's it's a wee bit disappointing to hear that people aren't wanting it. I think what we have to put on there is, yes, I would encourage you to be in contact with your local health board pharmacy team, because that's who's going to be able to do that local engagement with perhaps LMC or local GP subgroup. And I would encourage you to just bear in mind your responsibility. So part of the almost conditions of using that PGD is that the person who has oversight of prescribing, i.e. the GP, needs to be aware that supply is being made. So you've got a duty to send it on. Quite what they do with it on the other end, because we know in some places the slips aren't used or not updated or processed properly, it is another matter. In an ideal world, we'd all get along and move smoothly. I know I've been challenged before on why on earth did you give that prescription when I didn't authorise it, and all sorts, and it all boils down to sensible conversations. And I would encourage you to have those conversations out of the moment. So well after the fact, at a time when everything's going swimmingly, it's when you lift the phone and say, listen, I wanted to speak about X, Y, Z, how we're going to work this best overall as a service. But yes, that is disappointing, and sorry you're having to face into that. Harry, some more?
Yeah, I've got 2 more questions from Facebook this time, Adam. This one's from Katie. If there's a dose change to a compliance aid prescription mid-cycle, can we do an unscheduled care to cover the changes required to existing packs and keep the new prescription to run alongside the new one? So maybe a bit similar to the kind of synchronisation we'd covered previously. Surgeries where I'm reluctant to write prescriptions for half cycles, which means the prescriptions end up out of sync.
And again, that's one that I would suggest your local health board team to the pharmacy team maybe need to do a bit of work with GP colleagues and what is the best way forward. If it's a planned, as much as any medication change is planned, but if it's something that is not drastically urgent, it doesn't take a lot of time to work together to figure out what the right quantity is to be prescribing on a prescription that you've got. I would say as well that given that you'll have a valid prescription, you may be able to make use of the PC and PMR endorsements again to adjust quantities. So perhaps that if it's a completely new item, you've still got a full tray to be given out before you start the next one, perhaps the quantity goes up from 28 to 35 using a PC endorsement. Not for me to say specifically, but that's another route that you may well be able to. With unscheduled care, it's not, the patient hasn't run out. You've got a valid script that you could use. So it falls out with that use that's outlined in the PGD. So that for me is there are other ways to do that. And again, it goes back to those conversations about ways of working. Maybe one that we should probably do. Something about a joint evening with outcomes. Maybe there's one for GP practice teams as well. Actually, here it's a decent idea. Amanda, sorry, how was that? You had 2?
I have one more before Amanda, if that's okay.
Yeah.
This is from John on Facebook. So we've been asked to use CPUS to issue medicines on receipt of an email from out-of-hours doctors stating an intent to supply. So containing all the info that would normally be on a prescription and sent from an NHS email address. Most commonly for antibiotics and certainly infrequently. These doctors are working from home and have no means of printing and sending paper prescriptions within the 72-hour period. I do feel this is in the patient's interest, but not sure how we would stand with regards to insurance legality. What is your view on this?
So this is something we actually put in place pretty much across the country near the start of COVID. And we worked with the GPHC, we worked with Lanarkshire that first did it actually, and we worked very closely with them to see is this appropriate, and the GPHC essentially, as much as they ever do, signed off on the process with a caveat in there that it was to be reviewed at sort of 6-monthly intervals. After the first year, the need for it was deemed to no longer outweigh the small, admittedly small risk that's involved in it. So it was stepped down pretty much everywhere apart from, I believe, 2 health boards. One that's got a high, both have geographical challenges, one in the extreme, and the other has a high proportion of either there's doctors working out of hours, or there's doctors working from home, or they're not working in the out of hours period. So it is one of those really tricky ones. It is a process that has stood up to I suppose the scrutiny from the GPHC. They prefer it perhaps wasn't in place. That question would be one for the health board. It is legal by the letter of the law, because there is an intention to supply. Should it ever have been turned into a routine way of supplying? Perhaps not. I do believe that the overall volumes are still pretty low, and you can imagine in places like Highland that there's not much of an option elsewise. So whilst I'm not going to give you a ticket of endorsement for it, I can understand why there are remnants of it kicking around. For sure, and this might actually relate to a question that somebody asked earlier. Now that I realise it, so one for conversation with board colleagues, but it is legal. Amanda.
One coming in from Christina. She's accessed ECS a few times on a Saturday to search for a prescription that the GP had written on the Friday, but it had never reached the pharmacy. Drug and dosage available, but quantity not stated in ECS, and she's then had to waste time phoning out of hours and wait for somebody to phone back to clarify a quantity. For example, an antibiotic. Why is this constantly happening? Time wasting for both pharmacists and out of hours. I think just on this one, Christina, sorry. We've had many questions of ECS, but this is not one I've seen before in the hundreds we've had. So I'm wondering if it's been the same surgery, if there's something happening at the surgery end, because that's not a common question. So we can maybe pick that one up with you if you want to message me across, just to let me know, a bit more detail of the specifics. If it's the one pharmacy, the one surgery, there's maybe something happening in there we can pick up. Adam, I don't know if there's anything you would add into that, but it isn't one I'm aware of.
No, it's not one I'm aware of either, but I wonder, I suppose, in the interest of getting the patient the medication, if you've got the dose, the frequency and all the rest of it, I mean, without sounding flippant, take a stab at it. What's common in your area, what's common from that age group, presentation, whatever, and you can maybe save yourself that little bit of time there. And if it turns out not to be quite right, then when the prescription eventually makes its way around to you, then you would go about sorting that out, of taking the patient's perhaps mobile number or something. So that's the only thing I would add to Amanda, is don't let it stop you. And I wouldn't, I mean, you're certainly more diligent than I would be. I don't think I'd have lifted the phone after finding what was on ECS. I'd took a stab at the quantity and suffer the consequences if it turned out not to be right. Thanks, Amanda. You've got another one, Amanda? Is that your hand just still up? Thank you very much. Chokes. Back to the sheet. Definitely right. I'm going to get through these. Sure. Right. So another one somebody's asked. Caroline has asked, what is our payment for giving unscheduled care for a freestyle Libre? Now, this came up during the week in the office. I am sure the answer to this one is nothing, because you need to give a freestyle Libre 2 because the original is discontinued, and therefore off the, I was talking earlier about the configuration of each of these UCF services. The freestyle Libre is now off of that, but you will be paid appropriately for a freestyle Libre 2, and it is permitted under unscheduled care PGD, so feel free to make those supplies. Scheduled. Is it true, somebody saying, is it true direct referral to GP out of hours has been stopped, suspended, changed, and pharmacists no longer able to make appointments for business in some health boards? Hoping this is fake news. And it's Aileen, I'm really to hear from you. So the answer to that is no, it's not been stopped. It was stopped for a good number of months in Glasgow for a while, and we had some blips in Tayside, and I can't remember where. But broadly speaking, no, that is still in place. If it's not something that you tend to use in the out-of-hours period, I would strongly encourage you to get the numbers, get it plugged into your mobiles, get it in your phone diaries in the pharmacies, all the rest of it, because that's a real lifesaver when you just get confronted with something that you just can't handle, and particularly if the patient's quite unwell but you don't quite want to phone an ambulance. That again is something that most weekends shifts that I do, I tend to use. I would really strongly encourage you to make use of that. Siobhan, I'm maybe going to pick on you here. So Siobhan from NHS 24 is on tonight. This is something that she and I had spoken about before coming on this evening. I don't know if you maybe want to speak a little more about the professional lines and their use, and what you'd like to see more of from an NHS 24 perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, thank you very much for putting me in, Adam.
I know, on the spot.
Yeah, so I suppose a few questions as well. I think this has been really good for me to actually be able to take back to the boards as well around out-of-hours discussions and prescriptions and working from home and what that actually means for the pharmacies as well. So yeah, in terms of professional to professional, it has been restarted in all the boards that it was stopped in as well. And yeah, very much from an NHS 24 point of view, that is the best route to go down within community pharmacy. Adam already said earlier that we don't actually have control of what the boards are doing. So, you know, within NHS 24, it's a patient access service. So ideally, because they've already been to you guys, then it would be slightly further down the chain. So that's why we would recommend strongly to go professional to professional line. You know, whether that's for ECS checking or, you know, if patients are needing seen or any kind of appointments. Don't know if I've kind of covered everything there, Adam. Sorry, I do have a toddler running about as well.
No, you're quite right. There's 2 or 9 that are just beyond that door and it's that thing. So that's why the screen's blurred, because I don't want to get sent to jail social media. Yeah, so thank you very much, Siobhan. Another thing that Siobhan had wanted to go over before I take the next question with Mary was around, I suppose, just going back to basics on the service and what is it need from a patient to make a supply, and the answer is not very much. However, you can assure yourself that this is the medication this patient should get, and they have none, or they have some but not enough to last them till their next supply or whatever, then use that in your own professional judgment to make a supply as easily as you can, freely as you can, because we still are getting, certainly we get reports into the office, and Siobhan, it results in quite a few still NHS 24 calls every weekend, where patients have tried to access the service, and whether it's because they've not gone to the regular pharmacy, which shouldn't be a barrier to getting your medication that you've run out, whether it's because they're away somewhere on holiday, whether it's because they haven't brought an old pack, whether it's because it's been 3 months since they got something, or 5 months, or 6 months, or 7 months. If it's clinically appropriate, then make the supply, because all this noise kind of jams up the system elsewhere if the patient's going and try and access. Now, absolutely, if you've got any doubts about the clinical safety of supply that you're being asked to make, then exercise your professional judgment in that way, and try and support them to get in to secure a prescription another way. So a prime example there would be controlled drugs. So if you've got a Schedule 2 controlled drug that somebody's run out of and they're suffering as a result, that's another use of professional to professional lines. There again, depends on the board that you're in. I know what I know in Lanarkshire that they will occasionally, what they'll do is arrange for a prescription to be left out of hours that can then be taken to a late open pharmacy. So there's all these different routes, but I would really say to you, just use it as freely and liberally as you can. Now, Harry's had his virtual hand up for a while, so it must be getting tired. Harry, please, next question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you, Adam. So the first one's come in from Catherine via email tonight. Now, so we've already touched on using the UCF to bring items into line, but I have seen pharmacies and pharmacists do this to bring CMS into line. Is this correct?
Nope. So again, there's always another way. It's going to be my answer to this recurring sort of synchronisation question. I do still think that there's room for a service there, if we all agree between health boards and whatnot that it's the right thing for people's medication to be all lined up. Serial prescriptions have got their own tolerance within them, much like ordinary prescriptions around about quantities. There is also a recognised right way of doing things if there are medication changes that needs done at the prescriber end. So again, whether you're been doing prescriptions, CMS serial prescriptions, or CMS MCR prescriptions for years, or whether you're just embarking on that journey, there's a serial prescription toolkit and IME facilitator support for GPs to get this right. So there is a specific process to go through to make sure that any new prescription that's being added to somebody's serial prescription list is prescribed in such a way, and sometimes it involves manipulating the other items that are already available, such that they don't get knocked off. It's a little fiddly, but it's the right way to do it. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. I'd encourage you to have, again, going back to those conversations, and if you need to, pull in your community pharmacy lead within the health board to support you with those conversations. So yes, thank you for that, Harry. Was there another?
Yes, I have one more for you, Adam. This is in Facebook from Mark. If it was near closing time in the pharmacy and a parent comes in asking for hydrocortisone cream for a child who's under 10 to treat a flare-up of eczema, is this allowed with unscheduled care? The child has had this item prescribed previously a few months ago.
I would. So
I would
that,
too.
Again,
I would
so,
too. Yep.
Yeah. So again, that's there's a can I and should I within that question, isn't there? So can you? Yes, PGD absolutely allows you to. Should I? Again, maybe you want to ask a few questions around, well, what does the rash look like? Is it weeping? Is it green? Is it a dog bite? All these safety questions to make yourself more and more sure that this supply is not going to do any harm to that child. But yeah, absolutely. I would fully support you in that.
Thanks, Adam. That's me for my questions just now.
Okay, I've still got a few to get to, so let me return to those. Emergency supplies whilst surgery is open, looking for clarification from Anne-Marie. So I'm assuming the question there is, can you make emergency supplies while the surgery is open? And the answer is, yes, you can. So the wording in the PGD has changed over the years and is now something like, if you cannot reasonably procure a prescription from the prescription available, which is different to their practice that they're then being closed. So just like all pharmacies are under pressure at the moment, and some have got real serious workforce issues. So to some practices, so it may be that it might be in the middle of the day on a Wednesday, but you're not going to get a signature on a bit of paper. It might be that, as I said earlier, it's towards the end of the day, but the only prescribers are on who's call duty, could be somebody sick. All these different reasons, doesn't really matter. The question that we have is, what is going to happen if I don't make this supply? Is the patient going to suffer? And can I get a prescription turned around? Maybe the surgery you work with, so I used to work in a surgery that was a pharmacy that was attached to a surgery. And if everything was firing on all cylinders, then we could get prescriptions turned around in the same day. And it was just a matter of the patient calling back later in the day. And that was grand. There was a great process for it. But sometimes we weren't firing on all cylinders, or the GPs weren't firing on all cylinders, and we did have to pull out the use of unscheduled care. Again, it depends on the patient's individual circumstances as well. If they are on their way to the airport to go on holiday, and you technically could get a prescription later in the day, you're not going to do that. So just let the circumstances inform your decision, as well as any sort of clinical questions you've got. But yeah, no, the surgery can absolutely be open, and you can make use of that too, for sure. Right, and I am on the last question that I submitted beforehand, which was, do you notify the GP of an unscheduled care supply? Do you still need to send the prescription generated to the GP, or do they get electronically sent like TSRs with MCR, and therefore no need to physically send the prescription? So better this a bit earlier on, that development is actually in the PMRs, but it's not in the GP IT system yet. That's going to take quite some time, unfortunately. So yes, at the moment there needs to be a notification that goes across to the GP. Something we actually haven't spoken about this evening, which I'll probably talk about now a bit broader, and then I'll return to the point, I promise, is that with the UCF claiming service, which within it houses unscheduled care, gluten-free foods, sleep cessation, all these different things, the local HB, local health board services, all the rest of it. all those supplies are completely electronic, the claims, including Pharmacy First. So you actually pretty much, apart from PGDs and unscheduled care, where you want to tell the GP what you've done, you don't actually need the paper at all. But if you are printing the paper for those ones, that's actually now a much handier way than it used to be, of scribbling down on a bit of paper or using the forms that are actually in the unscheduled care pack on the pharmacy.scot.nhs.uk website, actually using those CP4s that they print out. That's certainly what I do now in practice, is pop them in the wee ducats for the different surgeries on the Saturday to go on the Monday to inform them. So it's a step ahead of where we have been. I can't wait personally for when the UCF slots its message straight into the GPIT, but we're not there quite yet. So yeah, you can do that. And again, doesn't have to physically be, if you are remote and you do have the GP's email address, fax number, whatever, not that many are using fax anymore, then you can use that image to get it across to them as well, if you have to. I've landed at the end of the pre-submitted questions, and we've still got 10 minutes left, and I see thankfully Harry's got a question for us.
Yeah,
maybe two.
Yeah, indeed. I've got a couple of them, yep.
So
if a patient has come in looking for an emergency supply, this is from Katie on Facebook, but they've gone without their medication for 2 weeks or longer, for example, with citalopram or sertraline, where they've possibly gone through a withdrawal and are now looking to resume their original dose.
Professional judgment on that one, absolutely, and clinical judgment. So what's the risk in around that specific circumstance? You could have two different patients that you might make a different decision on there.
Yeah.
You might have somebody who is really particularly anxious, and your options are either sending them into the NHS in the hours period to rattle around for, I don't know, 20 hours or something, maybe, who knows, to actually get their hand in on a prescription. You might deem that is going to do them some harm. So you may choose, even though you know that it's going to take a while for the dose to build up and all the rest, you may choose to make a supply. You may choose to make a supply of a lower dose if you've had that before as well. Use your knowledge of pharmacokinetics and dynamics. Remember which one's which. To perhaps make a supply. There might be another patient who comes to you and is just like, listen, I've run out of these, I'd stop taking them. I really feel like I should probably go back on them again, but it's been a couple of weeks. If there's low anxiety around there, you may choose, and again, this is just pharmacist to pharmacist opinion, you may choose to make a different decision that says, listen, speak to your GP on Monday.
Yep.
And that's absolutely fine. It's just on the merits of what's presented in front of you at the time.
Thanks, Adam. I've got, another one's popped in, so I do have two for you. One from John on Facebook as well. Is there a reason why methotrexate tablets are allowed on unscheduled care after an amendment, but injectable forms such as Metojet aren't? I understand both need the same monitoring. Having made a supply and the claim being rejected, I thought it due to Metojet being an injectable. We might need to take that one away, Adam.
Because if anything, I would have thought that the tablets have been changed to allow. Yeah, okay. Because you're just as likely to have had a dose change with one as the other. So no, that's one. Siobhan, that went down. Yep. Very good. Okay.
And the last one I've got here for you, certainly the minute, Adam, from Steph, is the sidebar on ECS. Are technicians allowed to register for access? I have been told by pharmacists, yes, but the application is pharmacist-centred. Never heard back from the health board about it. Working with locums at weekends, I feel this could be useful.
Absolutely. So I believe the answer is no. Certainly in the vast majority of places that it is only a pharmacist-only application, which is a shame. It took flipping long enough to get that. Our ideal world would be to move, because exactly to your point there, some there's a health board that doesn't allow locums access, and then the ones that do struggle to get it to everybody. Our ideal would be to move to a situation where is it both Lanarkshire and Grampian, maybe not Grampian, somewhere else, have both got it's Grampian, so have both got a system where the Pharmacist is provided with a login, as opposed to the person, which actually makes it a heck of a lot easier. And I can certainly say that because I just know that where the username and password is. And we go in now, information governance sticklers specialists would rail at that because you lose your identity management, and therefore a degree of security. I would suggest that, given as pharmacists we have to live with the horrors that are the RP regulations, you can do a little bit of reverse engineering and find out who's on the premises, and it seems to be working fine in those two health boards. It's so far out with our control, it's not even funny. We have tried. Yes, if any of you do happen to know who your information governance lead is in your local board, you're going to let us know, because they are as evasive as unicorns, and we would quite like to speak to any of them.
And just for an update for you as well, Adam, in terms of the Metoject, etc., see Siobhan saying it is allowed, and Michael has also posted that we'll follow that up. So we're on the case for that one, Mike. Adam?
Perfecto. There's maybe then been a little slip a slip in the mapping of what's allowed in the PGD against what's allowed on the UCF service. Which is surprising because there's a really robust process in place for that in Public Health Scotland. So that is great for you to flag. There's certainly a few things we've taken from this evening that we will continue to work away on. So there's Matt Cunningham saying as well that Metoject is allowed on the PGD, so it's technically allowed, but it's getting inappropriately rejected. Excellent. That's exactly what our team is here to do. So those sort of things for you guys to don't worry about them. Okay. I'm finished with my questions. Looks like you guys might be finished with your questions.
No.
Right. Okay. I was also going to open up
squeeze one
before you come forward with that one, Harry. I will just say to the crowd, both thank you very much for coming along tonight, but also if you do have any questions that you're thinking, I was hoping somebody would ask this, just fling your hand up just now and ask us, or stick it in the chat. We've got 5 minutes left. I speak pretty quickly, so we can get a couple of questions in. Harry, please.
So we got, this is from Laura. If a patient was given an emergency supply on a Saturday to cover until the Monday and present on the Monday for the full prescription that has not arrived, can you make another CPUS supply?
Yep, absolutely. There's nothing to stop you from doing consecutive supplies unless you have a clinical concern that means you think supplying would do more harm than not supplying, which I would struggle to think of a situation where that would be the case. That does take me back to my answer to an earlier question around about how much should you prescribe. And I would always say, have a think about the flow. Have a think about what you know about how people order and how surgeries issue prescriptions and how your team turns them around as well. Anything less than 5 days worth is asking for this to happen. And I appreciate you might not have been the one that made the supply on the Saturday there. But the PGD allows you to go all the way up to a full cycle of what the patient normally gets. So again, just use what you know about local operations and ask the team around you if you're a locum and don't really know that. That's certainly what I do when I'm out and about, to make sure that I'm not throwing spanners in the works and causing unnecessary work with reconciliation. If the patient, I'll always go, if the patient hasn't ordered and everything's clinically tickety-boo, just make the whole supply. Makes it easier for everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. I've got one last one, and it's Natalie is asked, sorry to repeat myself, but how do we facilitate alignment as per this advertisement? Now, it is an Ayrshire and Arm thing, and if I'm right, I think I've spotted Ian on the call earlier on, so it might be back, because it does happen to say, order everything at once and your pharmacist will be able to help you align them all when required. So we might need to look into that one a bit further for Natalie and their colleagues in Ayrshire and Arm.
Yeah, it depends what's been put in place down Ayrshire and Arm. Perhaps that they're meaning the pharmacy will do the calculation, or you bring what you've got at home, or I don't know enough about what's happening, but remember we also do have that facility to use the PC and PMR functions if you've got a valid script in hand to fiddle about with the quantities. But again, I'm returning to, there is almost certainly an unmet need here in terms of a service. Again, we have to satisfy ourselves that is the right thing to do for patients. But if it is, there's got to be a better way, but it's not using unscheduled care, that's for sure. I see that Roy's probably coming to time check me, but I'll take Michael first. I think you were.
It's just to say that Ian was on the call, but he's not anymore, so we can't bring him in.
run away just as you got that question coming in, Harry. Whoops. Right. Robbie?
It was the time check queue, but also Rosemary on Facebook has asked, can the comments on the Teams meeting be shared after the event? Looked like there may have been some useful comments here. So that was just for me to say that we'll have the video ready by tomorrow morning, and we'll send that out on the e-newsletter, as well as it will be on the cps.scot website. There is a lot of comments here, so it'll be a bigger piece of work. We'll try and get it out by next week, if not the next week. We'll have it reviewed, and we'll work with our colleagues at NHS24 to review that as well, because there is a lot to work through here. So we will collate them and have that available for you on the website.
Sure. And what I would say as well is, depending on your team's license and what that looks like, you should, at least for a while, be able to log in and on the chat tab that's on the left-hand side. Quite often you can look back at meetings you've recently been in and see the transcripts, or not the transcript necessarily, but the run of the chat. So it might be that you can go in and look at that yourself, but we'll certainly make sure that it's available to you, along with the answers to the questions that maybe haven't been answered or have been answered on the side. But yeah, we are landing on pretty much happy. I promised I'd let you all away by then. Thank you very much to everyone coming after a hard day's work to come and listen to this. It's always nice to see such great engagement, such great enthusiasm, and I think as well just a willingness to learn and to ask all the questions. I mean, if you're wondering it and somebody else is wondering it too, and if I had one ask of you, it would be to go and start some conversations out there in the network with colleagues, with teams, with all the rest of it. That's certainly something I try and do when I'm out and about, without trying to change an entire practice in the 3.5 or 4 hours that I'm in there. Just maybe challenging some of those older assumptions around about having to be a regular patient, and about having to bring evidence, about all these different bits and bobs. I would say go and start those conversations, have really good, challenging conversations. And if you hit up against other questions you're not sure of, we are always available. You can call us on our main line that's on the website. We've got inquiries@cps.scot, that is our email address. And each of our emails and email addresses are all freely available online as well. Harry, you got to try and launch another 4 or 5 questions?
No, I was just going to say to you, I've got one from Adol that's come in, and I'll answer it. We'll answer it after this. So I haven't forgot about you. It's in via Facebook. We'll reply directly.
Perfect. Ideal. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Once again, go and have a nice rest of your evening, and take care. The next one we will do of these is likely to be in a couple of months' time, topic TBC. But if you've got any ideas, then by all means, fire them through to us on inquiries@cps.scot, and we will stick on the list. Thanks, folks. Cheerio.